I can see him now, standing across the road towards my living room window. He stands approximately 4 feet and 7 inches tall from what I can tell. The average for a boy his age. My estimate for that is he is either 9 or 10, but I have no way of knowing for sure. This is because of his costume, if you can really call it that. It's a draped bedsheet, tattered and messy on the edges with splintering tears and unevenly cut holes across his face and upper chest. In some ways, it reminds me of a caricature representation of an old Peanut special, and for this reason, I have come to call the boy Charlie. Charlie and I have made an unspoken agreement over these past 3 years. I do not bother him, and he never bothers me. This is because of what happened that very first Halloween after I moved in. I never intended to be up so late, but my friend Matt invited me to a party, and Matt was the type you simply couldn't say no to. I left my house around 9:30 that night, the usual crowd of trick-or-treaters already having made their way by, and that was when I noticed him in my rearview mirror. He was holding an empty plastic jack-o'-lantern and staring straight at me as I prepared to back out. I remember feeling startled. It was unusual to see anyone out at this time of night, let alone a child. So I put my car in park and jumped out to scold him. "What do you think you're doing? Your parents must be worried sick. What's your name?" I asked as I wagged my finger at him from across the street. The boy said nothing. He simply continued to stand there, clutching his plastic candy carrier and looking toward me. I remember that made me feel even more uncomfortable, but also a little frustrated. "Don't ignore me, young man. I'm talking to you," I shouted as I crossed over to get a better look at him. I reached down and grabbed his arm and pulled him over to my driveway. My plan was to call his parents and get them to discipline him and possibly give him a heart-to-heart. None of that happened. Instead, the moment that I touched Charlie, I could not move. I don't mean to say that he was strong or that he had pulled away from me. What I'm describing is utter and total loss of any bodily function. I was paralyzed, frozen. I released my grip from the boy immediately and stared down at my sweaty palm. I felt dizzy, confused, and out of breath as I took a few steps back. At first, I thought it was a mistake of some kind, maybe a prank. Could it be that the boy was carrying rocks in his shoes and couldn't move? I got closer to inspect his clothing. In the dim light of the street lamps, I couldn't make out much, so I chose to crouch down. He was wearing long Levi denim jeans under the bedsheet, which ended in some mess of mud and stains on his bare ankles. But no socks nor any shoes, just naked feet which seemed to be covered in dirt and grime. Getting back up to my feet, I placed my hands on my hips and tried again to intimidate him. "What's your name, son?" He made no reply at all. "Look, if you don't cooperate with me, I'm going to have to call the police, and that's that," I said firmly. The air was still. It didn't seem like my words meant much of anything to him. Just to show I was making good on my threat, I whipped out my smartphone. The way he just continued to gaze as I unlocked it and showed I was getting ready to dial made me nervous. "I'm not bluffing," I told him. Again, not even a whimper of frustration from the boy. I dialed. Not because I felt that I needed to make him comply, but mostly out of concern. Something wasn't right here, and the authorities needed to be notified. I went back to my car to grab my purse after talking to a police officer, and then messaged Matt to tell him that I would be running late. After about 10 excruciating minutes of the boy staring at me, I spotted the police cruiser at the end of the street. Gently, they pulled up to my curb and rolled down the driver's side window. A young officer nodded towards me and asked, "What seems to be the problem, miss?" I almost laughed. "The problem is this kid. He's been out here for almost an hour now. It's not normal." The officer looked at his partner and then both of them stared over at the boy. For a long moment, neither of them said anything either. "Nothing to be concerned about, ma'am. Go about your business," the first cop finally said. I think my jaw actually dropped. "What do you mean there's nothing to be concerned with? He needs help. Isn't there a loitering ordinance you should enforce, or a curfew?" I insisted. "Curfew is 10:30, ma'am, and only on school nights. He ain't hurting nobody," the second officer declared. They offered me a card to call back if there was any other issue and drove off nonchalantly. I looked up toward the trick-or-treater in frustration and marched back over to him. "This isn't funny anymore," I said, but my voice no longer had any sort of commanding tone to it. It was quivering and anxious. I didn't want to even touch him again, but I forced myself to do so. The same electrifying sensation flowed across my body. It felt like time itself was standing still. I couldn't tell you how long I was there just holding his arm. But after what seemed like an eternity, I finally heard him speak. It wasn't out loud though. This was like a deep resignation into the farthest crevices of my mind. "Walk away," it said firmly. It was a cold voice, not the voice of a child, not even really a human. No, this is the type of voice I think the devil must have, perhaps something even far older. It was old, ancient, and evil, and it made every fiber of my being feel a sense of hopelessness, emptiness. I let go of him and rushed back to my car. I couldn't get over the fact that this felt very, very wrong. So I called Matt up and begged him to come to my house, to do something to make this kid leave. It was an hour before he got there. I don't remember much about that hour other than a sensation of dread slowly creeping through my body. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I thought about going inside, locking the door and waiting for Matt. But it felt strange to hide from a child. It felt even stranger to be standing there, only 10 feet from him, and realizing I felt powerless. Was this even a child? Or was this something much older, much stronger, and far more deadly? These thoughts circled my mind like bloodthirsty sharks in a pool. I no longer felt comfortable talking to the boy, nor did I want to make eye contact. I just wanted him to leave. Matt got there right around 11. His face was a mixture of concern and frustration. "I really thought you were joking," he told me as he got out of his sports car and walked toward the boy. "So, what's going on, champ?" he asked, smiling at my visitor. The trick-or-treater, as expected, said nothing. "Come on, bud, let's go home," Matt decided and prepared to tug on his arm. I knew what was going to happen, but it still felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Matt instantly became rigid, the way a person might if he were to be encased in cement. His face looked pale and full of shock, his hair standing on its end. And then he jerked back and nearly stumbled into the road, his features the look of death. Matt got up, brushed his pants off, and started walking towards his car. "I don't need to be here. You don't need me, just leave the kid alone," he said. He started his engine, and I gripped the side of his car door. "Where are you going?" I asked. He stared at me with a frantic look in his eyes and repeated his warning. He sounded out each word slowly and purposefully. "Leave the kid alone." And then he drove off. When it was just me alone with the trick-or-treater again, that sick churn in my stomach returned. I finally convinced myself to go inside. I remember staying in the living room though, peeking out the windows and waiting for something to happen. I remained fixated on the boy, my eyes drooping and my weariness overwhelming me. Finally, sleep overcame me. The next morning, the boy was gone. No trace of him even remained. Not even the dirt that I had seen surrounding him on the sidewalk. It was as if he was never there. I tried to call Matt to get his viewpoint on the whole ordeal, but he didn't pick up. A drive to his apartment revealed that he was gone. His roommates hadn't heard from him. A few short hours later, I found out that no one had. He, like the trick-or-treater, had vanished. I went down to file a police report the day after. Something told me that it was important I do it for the boy too. But nothing ever came of it. Somehow I found a way to return to normal life. I forced myself to, really. It almost worked. I was almost free. Until the next year, when the boy returned. When I saw him appear this time, there was no doubt. I knew I was dealing with a specter of some kind. That only made my anxiety worse, and for the whole night, I couldn't leave my house. I was certain that if I did, something would go wrong. He would cause something to go wrong. Somewhere after midnight, I tried to get a grip of my sanity and become courageous. Maybe it was the drinks I had to calm my nerves. Either way, I convinced myself that I could go confront this apparition and make them leave. I approached with a drunken swagger, nervous and fidgety. The boy didn't seem to care, so I knelt down to get on his eye level, searching for any signs of his eyes or facial features. In the streetlights, I could see nothing, not even the reflection from his pupils. It's possible that he may not even have them. I imagined staring into the faceless boy, and it made me shake physically. I lost my courage then and went home to sob in bed. I dared not try again that night. Experiencing something like this not once but twice, it makes you reevaluate things in your life, reconsider what is and isn't important. I've never really thought about having kids, not even as a little girl. My mother raised me and my two siblings alone, and I guess I always equated children as being a hardship more than a blessing. Over the course of the next year, however, as the months crept by, I found myself thinking often of the boy. The one that I now had come to call Charlie. What was his story? Was he a ghost, and if so, why? My mind conjured up a narrative that involved abusive, negligent parents. The kind that didn't have time to take their son trick-or-treating, and dismissed the practice as being something better suited for a boy half his age. In dreams, I would see Charlie becoming angry and storm off to bed, shouting to his parents that he hated them. And then, when he knew that they were asleep in their beds, slowly, he would make his way out the back door. Having no money for a costume, nor parents that cared to craft him one, Charlie did the deed himself. He took an old bedsheet and a rusty pair of scissors and headed off into the night, with likely only a pocket full of change to purchase a plastic jack-o'-lantern. From there, the dreams are murky. Something happened to him, but I don't know what. Was he struck by a car, taken? I didn't know. But this year, I've decided that I want to find out. Yes, I'm breaking our agreement. Likely you will believe this is because of some curiosity, and you are likely right. I have begun to believe that Charlie is my responsibility somehow. I expect one of two things will likely occur. Neither is exactly pleasant. The first scenario involves me attempting to talk to the spirit that I believe is holding Charlie hostage, the ancient dark force that has chosen to have him appear on my street every Halloween. I don't really know if such a being can be reasoned with, or if it even understands human concepts, but I will show that I have some form of empathy and understanding for Charlie. I will tell the spirit that I want to help. I will even offer to take his place, so that Charlie may go free back to his family. This way, at least these spirits will feel they are getting something out of the deal. But again, I cannot say with any degree of certainty that this will work, which is why I'm leaning more towards my second option. This involves talking to Charlie directly and apologizing to him. It won't be easy. Going near to him still makes me nervous and queasy. The aura surrounding him is strong. But I want him to know what has happened is not his fault. I don't blame him for any sort of mental anguish he has caused me, nor do I hold him accountable for what happened to Matt. He's a child. He is innocent in this. All I want is for him to know that it'll be okay. It might be a lie, seeing as I don't know what the outcome will be. I believe it'll go one of two ways based on these methods. Either the creature will see reason and allow Charlie to return to his world or pass on to the next, or he will continue to hold on to Charlie as his prisoner. There is only one thing that I can be certain of. I am going to walk out of my house and be with him. I am going to tell Charlie everything he needs to hear, and then I'm going to take his hand. And this time, I'm not going to let go. It's likely I may never be able to, and I'm okay with that. At least Charlie will no longer be alone.